Jackdaw question. Using experts, substantive audit procedures, and impact of misstatements on the audit report. 1. Using experts. Auditors may rely on experts for areas requiring specialized knowledge, for example, property valuations, actuarial calculations, or complex legal issues. Engagement process. Assess the expert's competence, capabilities, and independence. Agree on the scope of work, objectives, and form of reporting. Review work. Evaluate whether the expert's findings align with audit evidence. Validate key assumptions and methodologies used by the expert. Documentation. Record the rationale for using the expert and how their work was integrated into the audit conclusions. 2. Substantive audit procedures. Substantive procedures are designed to detect material misstatements in financial statements. Exam tips for experts focus on evaluating their competence and ensuring alignment with audit objectives. For substantive procedures, tailor responses to specific financial statement areas or assertions. Clearly link misstatements to the type of audit opinion and justify the reasoning behind the report modification. We're going to look at a question called Jackdaw. This is question 6 from the December 2014 exam and is the 20 marks. Included in the question are the following syllabus areas: using experts, substantive audit procedures, and misstatements and the impact they have on the audit report. You must be careful with timing in the exam, especially with the section B question containing a scenario. The volume of information in this scenario must be absorbed to ensure a pass. Therefore, aim for spending 1.8 minutes for every mark. This question should take you no more than 36 minutes. To successfully complete this question, you will need to plan your answer, taking care with the time allocated to each part of the question. Use the scenario where needed, and have clear and efficient communication. It may be worth pausing the video at this point and printing off the exam question. That way you can follow the scenario as we talk through it. As with any question containing a scenario, it is important to plan the answer and use the information that has been provided. Reading the requirements before the scenario really helps you focus on the important parts of the scenario when it is time to digest it. This is crucial given the time you have in the exam. Let's now break down the requirements. Part A asks you to explain the factors Puffin & Co. should consider when placing reliance on the work of the independent valuer. This is for 5 marks, and therefore you should plan to spend no more than 9 minutes on this part. For 5 marks, they're expecting you to be able to explain 5 factors that would be considered. Part B asks to describe the substantive procedures the auditor should perform to obtain sufficient and appropriate audit evidence in relation to Part 1, the revaluation of land and buildings and the recently purchased warehouse, and Part 2, the valuation of work in progress. The marks have been allocated as 6 marks for Part 1 and 4 marks for Part 2, giving a total of 10. Each mark will be awarded for a clear, detailed, and relevant substantive test. This is definitely the most challenging part of this exam question. With 10 marks for 10 substantive tests, you should aim to spend around 18 minutes for this part. Part C explains that there has been a misstatement found by the auditors that Jackdaw management are refusing to amend. It asks to explain the steps Puffin & Co. should now take, and the impact on the audit report in relation to the director's refusal to amend the financial statements. This is for 5 marks, and therefore 9 minutes should be spent on this. 5 points should be explained to give maximum marks. Let's now begin structuring our answer. In Part A, we focus on whether to rely on the work of the independent valuer. We have to explain 5 factors that the auditors should consider when placing reliance. While we have the scenario, there is very little to help us answer this part. The knowledge to answer Part A will come from your studies of audit evidence. The first thing to note is that the auditing standards, and more specifically ISO 500 on audit evidence, states that the auditor must consider the scope of work that the expert will carry out to evaluate whether they are capable. They should also review their qualifications and any memberships to relevant professional bodies to assess whether they are qualified to carry out the work. The auditors should review the expert's experience, for example, whether they have valued similar land and buildings previously. This will help decide whether they are competent for the role. Independence is important. If the expert's evidence is going to form part of the audit, they must have objectivity when carrying out their work. The auditors will therefore identify if there are any connections they may have with the client to establish if this may affect the reliability of the report. Finally, the auditor will review the detailed valuation report, in particular, the assumptions that have been made by the valuer, to decide if those assumptions look reasonable. These 5 factors will give the auditors enough evidence to decide if the valuation report is reliable and can form part of the overall evidence collected by them. Part B looks at the substantive audit procedures for 2 areas of the audit of Jackdaw. Part 1 looks at the work of the revaluation of land and buildings and the new warehouse for 6 marks. And Part 2 looks at the work on the valuation of work in progress for 4 marks. Details of both areas are in the scenario. We must read the information and use it to describe appropriate substantive procedures. Remember, a substantive procedure is work carried out by the auditor that will identify potential material misstatements in the financial statements. A written substantive procedure should include a description of how they are carrying out the work and why they are doing it. This area is always something that candidates struggle with. It requires a little imagination to add to the knowledge you have on gathering evidence during the audit. Let's focus on Part 1 first. Jackdaw has used an independent valuer to revalue a number of properties in the year. Plus, they have a new warehouse that they purchased in May 2014 during this financial year. For 6 marks, you can split your ideas between the new warehouse and the total of the land and buildings being revalued. For example, for the new warehouse, you could agree the cost of the new warehouse to the original invoices to verify accuracy. The auditor would also inspect the title deeds of the new warehouse to verify whether it is owned by Jackdaw. The depreciation is charged on a pro rata basis. The auditors should therefore recalculate depreciation and identify whether depreciation for the new warehouse has been charged for 9 months only. Now we only have 3 more substantive procedures to describe for the whole land and buildings balance revalued. The auditor should obtain the schedule of revalued assets and add it up to confirm accuracy of the total. They should then agree the revalued asset schedule to the valuation report to confirm the correct balances have been picked up. The schedule should then be agreed to the asset register to ensure accurate revised balances have been included. For Part 2, we need 4 substantive procedures relating to the valuation of work in progress. This relates to the partly assembled cars at the year end. Firstly, the auditors will need to establish how Jackdaw calculate the percentage completed. This should be discussed with the client before the inventory count takes place, while reviewing the inventory count instructions. The auditors will then need to establish whether the method used to carry out the valuation of work in progress has been carried out properly. They should observe the procedures carried out by the Jackdaw account staff during the year-end count to assess whether any assumptions made by them are reasonable. For a sample of partly assembled cars, they should compare the percentage completions assessed by the count staff to Jackdaw's policies or instructions for the count. This would ensure that the count staff were following instructions and minimizes the risk of misstatements. The auditors should also obtain a schedule of how the standard costs were calculated. They should agree a sample of these costs to original invoices or other supporting documentation. This gives us our 10 substantive procedures. There are more for both parts, and reviewing the suggested answer for this question is recommended. The more substantive procedures you familiarize yourself with, the better you will get at answering this style of question. Part C then looks at the audit report and the end of the audit process. The scenario explains that the audit team have identified an error when valuing work in progress, but the directors do not wish to amend the financial statements. We must explain the steps Puffin should now take and the impact on the audit report for 5 marks. My 5 points are as follows. The auditors should discuss with the directors the reasons why they do not wish to amend the financial statements. They should explain to them the impact this would have on the financial statements. They should also calculate the size of the misstatement and decide whether it is material or not, comparing it to materiality guidelines. If the misstatement is deemed immaterial, in isolation it would mean that they can issue an unmodified audit report, stating that the financial statements are true and fair. They should include the misstatement in the schedule of unadjusted errors to review at the end of the audit process, just in case there are other errors that in aggregate could be material. If the misstatement is material and the directors refuse to amend, then the auditors would need to modify the audit report. It would be material, not pervasive, as unlikely to be large enough to be pervasive. The opinion section should include an except for opinion. A basis for opinion paragraph underneath the opinion should then explain the misstatement found and the impact it would have on the financial statements. This 20-mark question has covered some key areas of the audit and assurance syllabus. Please remember, to be successful in this type of question, we need to plan the approach and ensure we have identified how long is needed for each part. Use headings to introduce your answers and space out your points so it is clear for the marker where the marks can be allocated. Finally, if there is a scenario, use it. This information was given to you for a reason, and at F8 they are trying to see if you can apply your knowledge to a given scenario and not just be able to remember the facts. I hope you found this video useful. Thank you and good luck.